cry, and I wonder why. Safe and sound, dead on the inside. Is my life gonna pass me by?
Hi everyone, this is Denise Wise, and she's just finished a book, so we're going to talk about her new book that just came out and some of her background. Could you describe yourself and your book that just came out?
Oh, hi Scott. Yes, I am actually an author now for the first time because I've written a story about my life as a Jehovah's Witness and then coming out of that and what I've done with my life since then, how it's affected me and my family. And the book that I can show you is called Rising from the Ashes of Jehovah's Witnesses. And my author alias is ISIS, Allthings.
Could you describe your title?
Rising from the Ashes is a bit like rising, the phoenix rising from the ashes. So I feel as if I'm taking flight now, which I have done in different ways, but especially now, with a new way of life, a new horizon and hope and transformation. You know, a lot of those things I've worked on very hard over the last 25 years.
Wow. So we're going to get into some of those details. And then this alias, your other name that you go under, ISIS. Yeah. How do you say it?
Well, I did want to call it ISIS, but a lot of people have negative connotations to that name, which is actually an ancient Egyptian goddess, Isis. I went to Egypt last year and I visited a lot of her temples and I liked the name. And Allthings was just a name I plucked out of the air because I thought, well, it's a play on words, you know, I sees all things. You know?
I like that. I liked how the synopsis for your book, it mentioned the Western world's most coercive Christian fundamentalist religion. Could you speak to that? The synopsis that's on the website?
Yes, well, I have read that somewhere recently. There are a lot of support groups for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember it being discussed on there as nowhere near as benign as people would like to think. And most of the people I start to talk to that don't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, they think they're a bit annoying knocking on the door, but they don't know anything about how coercive they are. They don't have any idea that they're a high control group. They may know that you don't celebrate birthdays and Christmas, and possibly that you don't have blood transfusions, but they usually know nothing about the fact that you have to sacrifice your friends and family when you leave and you're ostracized for that. So I just feel that they can be labelled as one of the most coercive, high control groups for many reasons, but those are some of the large ones.
Yeah. I'm always surprised that people don't seem to know that there's this whole negative side to it, and it's just not. There's no public awareness. It seems like, even though there's probably millions of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and we're not quiet necessarily.
Yes, I saw a figure plucked out of the air the other day because there's 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses currently, and somebody had calculated there must be about 24 million ex-Jehovah's Witnesses because so many people leave. But the fact that it's not out there in the public domain is down to several reasons, isn't it? Which is, there's a big operation to cover up these things.
Right, and they spend millions of dollars and litigate like crazy to do it. I wonder about that number. I think that might be closer to something like 2 or 3 million.
That sounds more reasonable.
Yeah. But, I don't know. I don't know if there's an official
Maybe
count.
I didn't have my glasses on when I was reading that.
Just from like the little bit of, I try to do some basic math on, how many people would have left percentage-wise since like the 80s. But I also don't know the number. So how does it feel to be a published author?
I really love it. You know, it's something that I've been working on for 13 years, I've realized. So it's like a long labor of love, and it's like giving birth. It's exciting, exhilarating, and also it's been quite exhausting as well. But I'm proud of what I've done now. I really am.
Yeah. What kind of topics are you going to cover in the book, just to give people an idea if they're going to go read it or buy it?
Yes, well, originally it was an autobiography, and it was a story of my life and hope and transformation coming through trauma and an abusive situation. And then I realized that there was so much to cover on subjects such as the huge problem with child abuse, paedophilia cover-ups, and many other things that I felt needed to be addressed, and also to give people a reference of where to go for help. So it has turned into a semi-help book as well as an autobiography. So yeah.
That's great. And then, in case people were to cut out of the interview quickly, where could they buy the book?
It's online, and my publisher is lulu.com, but it's also as a Kindle version on Amazon. And you can order to print as well and get that posted within a few days.
Nice. And how much is it?
It depends who you buy it with. So I think it's around $15 for the print to post version, and maybe $13.90 for the ebook version.
Okay. Great. So lulu.com.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So number 3. Another question that people always ask me when they find out that I've left the religion is, why did you leave? And I want to ask, why did you leave, but also the initial reasons, even though I'm sure it's very complex, as it always is. And also, how did it feel when you first left and realized you're on the outside?
Yes. I like this story. It's the Adam and Eve story.
Interesting.
The apple. Yeah, the original sin.
Okay.
It was just an aha moment, you know, of going through 2 years of psychotherapy beforehand, and reading a book which my therapist lent me, which is Woman and Religion. She's a clergy woman, and she writes about the way that women are perceived differently, even with the cloth of the church as a clergy woman. She didn't always feel that she was treated in the same way. She talked about Adam and Eve and how women are perceived as second-class citizens because of the original sin of persuading, you know, eating the fruit, the apple, the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and then persuading her husband to do the same. And the resulting, you know, punishment from God of being subject to the man as the head of the house, and then also giving birth in pain, and really, yeah, setting the scene for the Quran and the Bible, the religions that branched off from those, to have that view of women all down through centuries. And I just saw red, and I just went, what the hell? Why am I in this religion? I don't want to be part of a patriarchy anymore. And I just felt like a huge weight had just been lifted off me.
And again, you said you had been through psychotherapy. You had gone to a psychotherapist and were getting help while you were a Jehovah's Witness?
That's right. And I went into that thinking I had something wrong with me, and trying to solve issues in my marriage. Mm-hmm. And I did actually explain to the therapist that I didn't want to talk about my religion. I wasn't interested in changing my religion at the time. And you know what? She never actually raised that. We never talked about it in 2 years. And she obviously realised what she was doing, with me. Cognitive dissonance, as we know, if you're challenged head on, then, you dig your heels in even harder. So she didn't do that. And it was brilliant, because that was the one thing she did, was give me that book near the end of my therapy. And that was the key that just opened me up. I think she'd rebuilt the sense of self, a core sense of who I was, identity, in that 2 years. And it was just enough, for me to assert myself for the first time properly in my life, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get into that more later in the interview, but you brought it up already, that mental health and going and seeking someone professional to talk to. There's so much stigma around that. Would you recommend it to others in the religion or out of the religion?
Essential, yes. I mean, especially with a high control group who have taken away your autonomy, and you're not allowed to think for yourself, make decisions outside of the box. And that's really the major challenge of a therapist, is to help you to realise who you are, and that you have a right to use your own instinct, your gut instinct, and make decisions for yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember in the last about 4 years when I was in, there was this long campaign for at least a couple of years of kind of an attack on what they called independent thinking. And it blew my mind, and I challenged it then, even though I stayed in the religion for a number of years longer. It was just such an insult that we're not allowed to think for ourselves, and that they have to actually just say it out loud. You can't do that. I thought that was insane, even as a witness. So when you were in the religion, also in the synopsis of your book on lulu.com, it mentions that you were a pioneer. Could you describe to someone who doesn't know what a pioneer is, and what is your day like as a pioneer? Or a full-time minister?
As a full-time minister, there are several options, but I had the 90 hours a month schedule, which is recorded on a piece of paper every time you call, and you go back and see someone or study the Bible with somebody, and how many hours you've done is all recorded and sent back to head office. And therefore 90 hours a month, as you can imagine, leaves you only time really to do a part-time job. I was living at home with my parents, so they were supporting me. They wanted me to pioneer. And it would mean going out and knocking on doors every day, practically. I would have met with a group of other people in the morning, say 9:30, had a little strategy meeting to decide which territory we were going to go and preach in, and choose a partner to work with. We didn't call on door to door on our own for security reasons. And then, I suppose I kept quite fit, because I would use a bike, a cycle, cycle between the meeting place and the territory, and walk around for a couple of hours. Most people were not home because they're working, so you're walking up and down people's pathways, knocking on doors, and using up a lot of energy. And it's tough in the winter as well. You get cold, and then you have lunch, and then maybe go and have a Bible study with someone in their home in the afternoon. And due to people not being around in the day, I suppose I probably would have done 1 or 2 evenings preaching, or going back to seeing people in the evening, apart from the 3 meetings a week, obligatory meetings that everybody attends, of course. So vast amounts of time and energy spent. For 10 years I did that.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a lot to maintain. There's some programs in that religion with pioneers. After the first year, you're officially a pioneer, and then And then are there more opportunities as a woman to do something to get a high, like somehow move higher in the hierarchy? Or is that sort of the pinnacle? I can't remember.
Well, there are only really the options of becoming a missionary, which I wanted to do, or going to live in the Bethel, which is, of course, the headquarters where they do all the printing. I did consider it, but I would have preferred to be a missionary because I like travel, But I didn't get that far. There's no other option for a woman because they can't preach directly to the congregation, teach, or be involved in any counselling because that's entirely a male prerogative.
Is there anything about pioneering or being a full-time minister that you miss now that you're on the outside?
Nothing that I can think of.
There's something I remember, because I did a little bit of it as kind of an auxiliary pioneer, but had some Bible studies or went on a lot of other people's Bible studies. And there was something about teaching something that sort of reinforced my own belief system. If I have to convey the idea to them, then it seems stronger and more believable for me, even though half the stuff is like really, really out there.
I do enjoy teaching, I think, but it runs in my family anyway, because my grandmother and my aunt and my mother, both old school teachers. And so I suppose from that point, I did teaching. But then when you're asked to help people give up smoking and drugs, destructive lifestyle habits to become a Jehovah's Witness, then you're really getting out of comfortable territory into areas that you're not qualified to teach and support. Right?
We're very unqualified as a general group, I think, in that religion. I think there's something valuable that comes from doing that, which is interpersonal skills and communication, being able to talk to strangers easily, being comfortable doing that. Not a lot of people, I don't think, are comfortable. And I think some aspect of being able to be almost like it's almost like a sales job in a sense. You're sort of you sort of become really good at selling not a product but a concept or an idea. And I don't want to be a salesperson, but there's value there, I think, to get something out of this crash course.
Yes, and I'm hoping to be able to use that. Persuasive leadership skills have been useful as well at work, and giving presentations or public speaking. Now, it freaks most people out, but obviously we've been trained. Started to be trained from the age of 10 in the theocratic ministry school, which meant, standing there and working on all those points of good presentation and posture, gestures, the whole thing. So I guess it does come a lot easier for us to do that.
Yeah. They've canceled that now. They don't do it anymore.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. I've heard that. I mean, I haven't gone and attended to find this out, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard to believe because I think it was going for like 80 years or something.
Yeah.
You talked about in your article that you wrote, you used the term existential angst when you were a full-time minister. Could you describe kind of what that was for you when you were in the religion?
I think you're programmed constantly to be in fear of dying at the hands of God. When he brings his war on the earth, which we know they call Armageddon. And so the fear of death is something that you face regularly. And the other major fear, I think, is worth noting, that they are completely paranoid about Satan, the devil, and any kind of spirit activity or demons that might influence you away from your ecclesiastical duties, or make you do things that you wouldn't normally do, influence you in some way. It's a fear-based mentality. You're easier to control you, of course, if you've got fear and guilt. Those are the two main tools that most cults use, but they in particular use. Yeah.
Could you give an example of how you were afraid, or were someone used guilt to manipulate you, or the group did in some way?
Well, I think with guilt, particularly around sexuality, and especially if you're a pioneer, you feel as if you have to be an example in the congregation. There are usually only a handful of full-time ministers in a congregation of, say, 80. You might have 45, and therefore you're put a little bit on a pedestal, I guess. So you wouldn't ever want to be seen to be doing anything contrary to their the very strict rules and regulations around being chaperoned if you're dating somebody, misconduct in any way, which is basically you can't do anything.
It sounds like it's a ban on intimacy. It's not just the rules of kissing or being alone. Like, you can't actually be intimate in any sense. That's kind of how I started to think about it.
Absolutely, yeah. So there would be guilt around that, and I think just fear would come in if you transgressed and you were disfellowshipped from the congregation. Then obviously the fear of losing your family.
Right. That's the big one, I believe. That they can take not only your friends who are kind of there's a constant stream of new people in that religion. If you travel a little bit, there's always new people in and out and moving around. But like families, they can even take your blood, flesh and blood from you. That's the big threat. It's always there. I didn't even believe that they would do it. Like, I couldn't fathom a world where my family wouldn't communicate with me. But of course, that's the reality.
Yes, I heard your story, and it was more poignant in a way than mine, because I don't think you were steeped in as deep as I was.
No.
And you weren't expecting some kind of leeway with your family.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
true.
not really understanding why, whereas I knew, I was going from black to white, if you like, or I would call it that.
Right.
I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew the consequences of what I was doing.
Mm. And it happened?
So it didn't surprise me at all. And
Gotcha.
I've never tried to manipulate that situation to be anything other than it really is. Because for me, it just makes it more painful.
Right.
To do that.
So you didn't try to break that barrier or tear down the wall or cross over?
Yeah, I mean, having a child who isn't a baptized witness, she didn't see very much of her grandparents after that. But at least I was able to drop her off for them. She stayed over a few days in her summer holidays and things. And so I was able to stand on my mother's doorstep and at least have a brief conversation with her when I dropped Chantal off. And then, I would go and pick her up again and would have another stilted conversation on the doorstep. But it was traumatic, but better than not having any contact at all.
Again, this is your own daughter.
Yes, for her, I wanted her to still have access to my her grandparents as far as possible.
And did she ever get baptized and join the religion?
No. I left when she was 4, and
okay.
so she wasn't raised as a witness. But there's no actual reason why she shouldn't have had contact with her grandparents.
Right. Gotcha. So the stilted conversations, the tense nature of it was you with your parents. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Wow. So I was going to bring this up later, but since you brought up your daughter, how sometimes people get tied more wrapped into the religion with their child, if they have a child in the religion or in that time period of their life. How was it with you and your child? Did your child help you leave, or was there some reason that was tied to her?
Yes, I credit her with helping me, opening my eyes to the fact that it's completely unreasonable to be expected to take a baby or a young child to long adult meetings 3 times a week. And I lived in Switzerland, and even the weekend meeting was on a Saturday night. So you have a young child who's out till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night and not in bed as they should be. You're having to take their feed, their bottle, their nappy, their toys and everything. And there's no creche and no Sunday school. So children are expected to sit on their parents' lap or quietly during the meetings. And many children are disciplined physically for not sitting still, which I strongly disapprove of. And I didn't do that with my daughter. But reading the threads now of ex-JWs, there's a lot of trauma that's come from being humiliated under those circumstances and taken to the bathroom and beaten.
Right. Yeah, it seemed so normal back then. My parents didn't really do that. They would take us into the library and hang out with us, which they had 3 kids and then eventually 2 more daughters later. But there's other families who would definitely take their kids and spank them, beat them while they're scream crying in the bathroom. And I think that's a very strange, abusive thing to be normal in a so-called Christian religion.
I think that this scripture, spare the rod, spoil the child, is totally overused in that organisation as an excuse for violence.
Mm-hmm. And no kid wants to sit for hours and not be able to say words or play with a toy. It's the most boring adult situation for a child.
Yeah. So yes, that was a factor, definitely, in my just realising that there was so many expectations that were unreasonable.
How old was she when you were still attending?
Well, so she was born in that sense, and then she must have been 4 when I stopped going. Yeah. And I think from her point of view, she made lots of friends and it was a nice social occasion, and she wasn't a grumpy kid when she was tired at the end of the day, like some kids can be. So she's a bit of a night owl like her dad, so she was fine. But it's not ideal, obviously, because, if they're not getting to bed till 9 or 10 at night, then they're sleeping in late in the mornings, which would, when they go to school, that's affecting them at school. Wow.
I had another couple from Minneapolis, my home city. They had a daughter, and one of their big epiphanies and one of the reasons why they left was they were reading the book, My Book of Bible Stories, the book with all the graphics and illustrations that teach the Old Testament basically to children. They were skipping stories because they didn't want to scare their daughter. And it was about half the book they wouldn't read to their daughter because they didn't want her to have these ideas in her head and have nightmares. And because they did that, they started having conversations about that, and then that was a big reason why they actually ended up leaving, because they realized how dark some of this stuff is.
That's right. I mean, I've actually put a drawing in my book of the god Molech, which is one of the pagan gods in the Israelite times. And it was the god that they used to sacrifice the newborn baby to. So they had a big fire in its stomach, and it was made of gold or something, and it had these big arms, and the hapless parent or whoever, the priest, would have to place this newborn baby in the arms, and then they would just throw the child into this fire. And so, yeah, we learned about that, and we were drawing, because you were allowed to draw pictures and illustrations during the meetings to amuse yourself, as long as they were about Bible stories, right? So I kept that all these years, and I've actually put it in the book.
Cool.
It's yeah.
Wow.
Traumatic experience. Another one.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting point. So this guy, another guy interviewed, and I had never met him until we interviewed, but he's going to come out in some future documentary video that we're doing. But in between our interviews, he brought up something I'd never heard of before, and there's this whole kind of an intellectual look into the Bible and ancient Israel and the cultures, and when the books were really written, probably, and who probably wrote them. And if you read Genesis 1, they use, I think it's a couple words, and I'm going to botch this, but they're not saying Jehovah, obviously. They're writing, it's translated to English as God, and another one's translated as the Lord God, I believe, at least in the Bible that we were using, and or the Almighty. There's a couple different names, and the gist of it is the Israelites and Judah were two different groups, and they were separate for a long time, but they had their own pantheon of deities. And when they reunited, instead of saying our book is right, your book is wrong, or vice versa, they just said write them both down, and we'll keep them both as valuable literature as part of our big group of different gods. But then when you get the Bible, it just says the word God or Lord, some generic term that's sort of all-encompassing. But if you go through, there's a number of different deities that are mentioned that were all acceptable at the beginning.
Okay.
Which I don't know that much about it, but yeah.
I never heard that before.
I want to read that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we also drew things. The one that I drew in the Kingdom Hall, we had a circuit overseer visit. I drew the Ezekiel, the ship that the Most High is inside of, with all the eyeballs on the wheels. And
his chariot.
Yeah, the chariot. Yeah. And then there's the whole theory about how that's a definite UFO story, that that's actually in the Bible is a UFO story.
Yeah, I heard that. I like it.
Yeah. Okay, what else we got here? I got into shunning a little bit before, and I have a question. The very first question we had talked about before. How did it affect you personally? And then what are some of the other red flags for cults?
Okay, well, shunning affected me in the sense that I was then not able to have social contact with my mother, and my sister at the time was still in, my stepfather, and then many hundreds of people that I knew and I grew up with and socialised with in London, you know, all the parties we used to go to as teenagers and trips that we went on and ice skating and all the fun. There were fun things that we did, and of course I haven't been able to communicate with any of those people.
Have any left that you've sort of got back in your life?
So lucky for me, some of the key people I hung out with when I was in my teens, we were the gang, and they have left. So as soon as I left the Witnesses and came back to England from Switzerland, I looked them up, and said, hey, I'm no longer a witness, and we can meet up. And we had, fantastic times together where we would just go over everything that happened, but then just get drunk and have a laugh and have a really good time. And I'm still in touch with them now. Some of those people 25 years later, we're still friends, and it's great.
It creates a special bond when you've come from this interesting world.
That's right. And in the meantime, you're obviously forging new friendships, but they don't really understand what it's like to have been a witness and what it feels like to have left. So those friends, if you can find them, are very valuable, especially in the first few years when you leave, if you can. And of course, my mother knew that, and my mother and stepfather knew that, because they didn't want me to know where my half-brother lived when I first met them. And he had just left, nothing to do with me, but we kind of left around the same time for different reasons. He was only 21, so he just wanted to get out there and have a good time and experience life. And so I knew what he was doing for work and where he lived roughly, and I went looking for him, and he had got an apprenticeship in carpentry and turning, and then he'd got himself a job in rehabilitation in hospitals. So he was teaching people how to use their limbs, their hands and arms, after they had operations, or older people couldn't use them so well. And so I knew that which hospital he was working in, and that he had digs in the nurses' quarters. And lo and behold, I found him. It was like one of those classic movie moments when he didn't know I was coming to look for him, and he saw me across the street. And so we kind of ran towards each other. And he was big because he was powerlifting, and he's still doing powerlifting now. And he just kind of grabbed me up in his arms in his big, strong way, and whirled me around. And it was
amazing.
Just that moment of pure delight, that we'd found each other, and that we could reunite and support each other.
How long had it been at that point?
That was 25 years ago.
Okay. But the gap, how long was the gap between when you had seen him before and then that amazing moment?
Well, not very long at that stage, because I'd just come back from Switzerland, and so it wasn't a long time. Yeah.
So I think we missed a gap in your story in terms of this interview, but so you had your daughter. Did you have her in Switzerland, or did you have her in England?
She was born in Switzerland.
Okay. So you had relocated already to another country far away from kind of all your home people, your home community.
Yes.
And then you had a child abroad.
I got married to a witness who I'd met in England, but he and his family had gone back to Switzerland. And so I made the decision to embark on this exciting new life as a married witness living in Switzerland in the mountains. And it sounds great, doesn't it?
Sounds really romantic and beautiful.
But it was tough, yeah. And I think that really helped me strengthen my core sense of who I was, because I was away from my mother and my family, and I had a young child, and I had to grow up fast in that sense and learn a new language. I couldn't speak the language when I went there, so I was quite isolated at first as well. But all those things, character strengthening stuff, just must have helped me over the years to then have the strength to do what I did.
When you're thinking about leaving or going through some trial internally, you can't talk to anyone about it in this closed community. Would you recommend people who are struggling with those things to go to a new location?
Yes, and I would, because obviously you don't want to be looking over your shoulder thinking I might bump into a witness on the street or in the supermarket, because we both know that if that happens, they are supposed to ignore you, which is not a very nice feeling, you know. I mean, you're already traumatized, you know, from leaving, but you don't want your nose rubbed in it by bumping into these, you know, self-righteous, holier-than-thou witnesses every time you go out. So to move away from everything you've known is probably the answer, except obviously you then really need to work at making new friends and contacts in the place that you go to. And I've done that in various ways by joining the gym, joining a class, you know, maybe I did silk painting when I was out there, and jewellery making, and just anything that you may feel passionate about that you've never really spent much time doing, because of course we're always discouraged to spend too much time pursuing our passions or hobbies, right? So that is now an ideal time to do it. And then as I progressed in my confidence, I got into music and started learning to write songs and to play the guitar a little bit and the keyboards, and then I got myself a job in the music industry, and it went on from there. So I ended up writing songs and recording them in a professional studio with a friend. So
yeah, the music I've heard from you is really high quality, high production quality music for sure.
Yeah.
Would you say that your songs have topics that are related to the religion?
Yes, I suppose the main one really is don't pass it on, because it's talking about not passing on the pattern of abuse to your children. So maybe you've been brought up in an abusive situation in some way, but you don't always have to pass that on to your children. And, you know, of all the things that I've done, that's the one main thing. I'm so pleased that Chantal was not, you know, involved and influenced by Jehovah's Witnesses from the age of 4. And she is a very grounded and independent young lady. She's confident and everything I would have wanted her to be.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, sometimes I think that leaving the religion for me was maybe the only interesting or powerful thing I'll do in my whole life, which I'm very proud of, but it's also like, I mean, there's so much more you could do.
Oh, well, you're doing a lot now by, you know, making films and episodes, interviews. It's just fantastic, you know,
Yeah, thanks.
it's a huge contribution.
I love doing it. It makes me happy.
Yeah. That's the main thing.
Yeah. So on the creative side, you talked about painting, singing, playing guitar, keyboard. Where could we hear some of your music or see some of your art?
Okay, well, I've got the branding for all my social media is basically the same as the book. So it will be reverbnation.com is where the songs are. Just a few of my songs are on there, and that's ISIS Allthings. And well, as far as my silk painting is concerned, I don't have a gallery of that right now, but I did really pursue that to the point where I was working and teaching silk painting.
Wow. What is silk painting? I don't think I actually have heard of that before.
Yeah, it's when you have a wooden frame and you stretch a piece of silk on it, and then you can use it as you would a canvas. So you can create a painting, but you can also make scarves, and I did all sorts of things like men's ties and cushion covers,
Oh, wow.
little pictures, and yeah. And I sold a lot, you know, and I did have private commissions as well, and I worked in a gift shop with that. So that creative spurt was before I left the Witnesses, and I think that relationship to colour also helped me to heal in some way, because I felt, looking at the colours I used to use, I was very bland. You know, as a pioneer, I would just wear cream and peach and sand and no strong colours. I wouldn't want to stand out. Then I started to really work with jewel colours, and I ended up painting poppies, red poppies on a black background all the time. I mean, I was obsessed with that. And my therapist was like, this is great, you know, your passion, and, you know, you're really looking at your shadow side with the black, that the passion is rising in you, and that's symbolised by the red poppies, you know. And so I started to understand the symbolism of colour, you know, and how healing it can be. Yeah, I'd recommend that, definitely.
I would like to see some of these silk paintings and the textiles, because I've never seen such a thing, and like how that fabric would be different than canvas. Much smoother, obviously.
Yeah. Yes, it has a luster to it when the light shines on it.
Right.
I do have some images which I can share with you.
Yeah, cool. Do you have an Instagram or any kind of social media with that kind of imagery on it?
I think, yes, I've got one place. It's in an album on Facebook, so I'll share that.
Okay, cool. I jumped ahead. So you were talking about how you got a job in the music industry. Could you talk about kind of when that was in your pathway and what were you doing there?
Yes, I've been working in London for several years and just discovering what life was all about. It was very exciting and glamorous, and we were going out after work, and this job was great because I was meeting singer-songwriters. They were coming into the office and we were doing their music royalties for them. And then we were setting up people with showcases and gigs. We were attending award ceremonies. We had our own big award ceremony in the big posh hotel, which I helped to organise, and met celebrities and things. So it was very glamorous. And then I met singing teachers and, the guy that I produced my songs with, and just all of these great things came from working there. And that was a great time. It was quite a long time ago now. It was around the time of 9/11, actually. Yeah,
2001,
around that time.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
It's amazing to surround yourself with creative people. And I think people don't realize that celebrities, they're not just this icon on a magazine cover. They're actually artists. I've never hung out with famous celebrities or artists, but I hang out with artists and musicians all the time, and it's amazing to hang out with people that are just, they're so down to create and want to collaborate and want to just make something new that doesn't exist all the time. It's really fun.
It is. I think that they're the ideal people to mix with, if you can, when you leave, because they're much more open-minded than the average population, really. More in touch with the guys are more in touch with their feminine, poetical, creative side, which was great for me. And I felt confident, to really just come out of my shell and be a little bit more who I am, authentic.
Do you think you might, from your blog or from some other experience, write another book? Do you have any ideas for the next chapter in your life?
Yes. I've spent the last 5 years in a medieval city called Norwich, and in the UK. And I've been really looking at medieval history and lots of things that I want to write about my experiences here, and just really enjoyed this chapter in my life.
Can you describe your city that you're living in? I don't know anything about it, even where it's at. I forgot to look it up.
Yes, okay. Well, it's in above London in the sort of east section next to the sea.
Mm.
And it's used wealthy city because of the trade, the wool trade, and then being able to put it on boats and ship it to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So this city was as influential as London at the time in the medieval times.
Okay.
And there's hundreds of churches, and there were hundreds of monasteries and cells, lots and lots of monks, and beautiful architecture. And we're talking back to the 12th century. If you go and I walk down the road, you've got big fortress walls from the 14th century. You just drive past them every day.
Wow.
It's stunning, actually,
Yeah.
and so rich with so many amazing stories. So
Yeah.
I'd like to write about that, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it a lived-in city, or is it kind of a tourist destination?
No, it's very lived in, and
Okay.
there are 3 universities here, so
Wow.
where it would perhaps a bit staid and old-fashioned, but they bring young people in, obviously, from all around the country, and so it's got a great diversity. It's lots of culture here, and art things going on all the time, and it's brilliant. Really love
That's
it.
great.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it out sometime.
Just a bit cold.
What's that? I missed it.
I'm missing the sun, that's the only thing.
Oh, right. It's a bit cloudy on the ocean.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to get into?
We didn't talk about mental health so much because I actually have been invited to join a project which is viewing mental health crises as a breakthrough rather than a breakdown. And there's a lady here in Norfolk who has got a project called #Emerging Proud. And that's emerging through trauma and abuse to hope and transformation. And she's accepted my synopsis of my book, the story, and it's on the blog now. And it's also possibly going to go into a pocketbook, which is a series of pocketbooks for distribution to hospitals and mental health clinics up down the country.
That's amazing.
For charity. So yeah, just got in there, and hopefully World Trauma Day is October, and my story hopefully will be in that book, released in October. We'll see.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, because that's a completely different audience from obviously targeting ex-JWs up
Right.
now. But,
which I think is the right choice. I think that's a great audience because we support you. We understand where you're coming from in a very visceral, real way. But really, the greater world, I feel like the topic needs to be more understood on a global sense, or at least in the West, where there's a lot more influence. Yeah, I'm also trying to make something for a greater audience. And there's more to life than that as well.
Yeah. I think cult-like thinking, really, if you take it out, most of the world is being unduly influenced right now, in one way or another, because of the media and politicians and the coercion to live in a capitalist society and not take responsibility for what's happening. So all of this is undue influence, and really the purpose of everything that I would want to do would be to wake people up in some way, whether it's religious or not.
Could you describe how cults, and specifically Jehovah's Witnesses, use undue influence? And I like how you're drawing a comparison to modern social dynamics and politics that we all are familiar with. It's not something that I've researched very well, and then you wrote me a description of it, and I feel like I'm probably not the only one who doesn't understand the term undue influence. But could you get into like more of that?
Yeah. There's a great Facebook page called Open Minds Foundation, and they talk a lot about undue influence, and I guess the old term for that would have been brainwashing. And cognitive dissonance is another thing, so that when you are brainwashed, you therefore find it extremely difficult to accept a contrary argument to the one that you have in your head. And so the tools that are used really are subtle at first. It's coercion, drip feed, repetition, like with advertising, again and again and again, and also making you feel inadequate, you haven't got enough of this or that thing. So the religious side of that would be, you're a sinner, you're not going to survive unless you do this, this, and this, and give up things, make you feel guilty. They give you unsolicited advice, so they're telling you how it is.
I don't miss that at all. That happened all the time.
What you're supposed to be feeling, yeah. So undue influence would also be discouraging from using your own natural instinct, gut instinct, which is given to us for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Even if you believe in evolution, you will know that gut instinct is the thing that is designed to save your life. Right. It's your survival instinct. And if you have that taken away from you, then you're just like malleable in someone else's hands.
They'll use you, manipulate you, take advantage,
influence you unduly. So then you're trained out of thinking of feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling like there's a red flag here. Why? That would be a healthy thing to listen to. And also manipulation, persuading you to do things that are an obligation. You don't really want to do them, so you start to feel resentful. You do them, and eventually people get very bitter and twisted. If you spend your whole life doing things you don't really want to do and not listening to yourself, that can have an effect on your mental health. And we know that the suicide rate within Jehovah's Witnesses is probably much higher than the general population.
Do you know any statistics on that? I've tried to find information.
You won't find it because, like anything, they record every dot and I when it comes to the ministry and how many books they've sold. But when it comes to suicide and how many people have died from not having a blood transfusion, things that would be important to know, there's suddenly no records of that.
I saw some number, again, don't have facts, but just doing like basic math, that the number of deaths from lack of blood transfusion, that elders and the the community that are tied to that, can't remember what it's called, the hospital liaison committee, I think it's called, but they're saying this person doesn't want blood, we're helping make sure that happens, and that person dies. It's sort of like it's sort of like a suicide in a sense, but it's also this abusive thing. Anyway, it's something like 50,000, over 50,000 people, which if you're going to compare it to a cult, like the most classic cult is the Kool-Aid cult down in South America, where everyone drank the Kool-Aid and died. It was a much smaller figure. That's the point.
I've just found it in my book, at the back of my book. I've got footnote references and further reading, where I give people the main pointers that they need for things like this. So blood transfusions, you would find an organisation called ajwrb.org, and that's Advocates for Jehovah's Witnesses Reform on Blood. And yes, you're right, I have read the same thing as you. It's like a mini genocide of 50,000 people dying of not directly from not having blood transfusion.
Refusing medicine for this religious idea. Yeah, that's crazy.
When I reiterate that even if you leave the witnesses, that's just the start of the journey. It's not the only solution. So I'd really emphasize that you need to show yourself some love, by really taking that seriously, about counselling, about doing things that really rebuild your sense of who you are and your soul and your creative spirit, and all of that is really important to do.
And maybe seek some medical professional help.
Yes, I mean, again, I mention in my book that it is good to go to a source where they understand cults, because sometimes it can be counterproductive if you're with a therapist that doesn't understand that. Because it's very, very powerfully deep, the influence, and you can get into it quite quickly, but to get out of it is actually a lot tougher than people realize.
Okay.
So,
that's good advice.
Yeah.
You mentioned two things. I took a note. You talked about cognitive dissonance. Tell me if I'm wrong. I always understood cognitive dissonance to be holding two separate ideas that are conflicting in your mind as both being correct.
Well, I think normally the situation would be that you have a held belief, and then someone else comes along with a counter belief.
Okay.
That you then have to weigh up in your mind, could this possibly be right? This person is challenging me, they're presenting some facts here. Which one do I believe? And unfortunately, the brain is designed in such a way that it can't hold that for very long, because it sort of just goes, I can't cope.
Right.
I either have to decide one thing or the other. And if it's approached in the wrong way, too direct, an aggressive way, then the person that's got that deeply entrenched belief will just dig in even deeper to a challenge. Even though you might be presenting facts and how can you not believe this? Here's the evidence, But thinking about, for instance, all the many trials in the courts at the moment, the inquiries into child sexual abuse from Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia called the ARC. There's been one in the UK as well.
Oh, really? What is it called? Is it a royal commission as well?
It was the UK Royal Commission.
Okay.
But they didn't succeed because the society actually didn't comply with a lot of their demands to surrender information that was needed. So they had to wrap it. After a few years, they realised they weren't going to get where they needed to get with that. But there's talk about them starting another inquiry at some point soon. And hopefully.
Yeah. How I understand it is...
Present these facts to people and who are witnesses, and the cognitive dissonance will set in, and the way that they will view it will be, well, they're lying, they're influenced by apostates, which is people who've turned against Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're lying, and none of this is true.
It's so ridiculous. I mean, it's the government asking for information about legitimate child molestation. We're talking about it because personal to us, but it's just a big problem that has to be solved. That argument that we're liars is, they're going to keep doing it, obviously, probably for decades, but it drives me crazy that that's their one-liner that gets them out of everything. Oh, it's just these liars who are making everything up. And no, we're not making anything up. It's too easy. We don't have to make anything up. You guys, they have all these really deep problems that need to be solved or dealt with.
I think also you have to think about the narcissistic aspect of Jehovah's Witnesses as an organisation, where they're always right, you know, and everyone else is always wrong, and the enemy out there, and everything's very black and white. There's never a grey area. And that would be, you know, typical in this situation of their feeding into their persecution complex.
Right.
You know, we're being persecuted because we're true Christians, because, you know, in Roman times, true Christians were persecuted, right? So therefore, because we're being persecuted, we must be true Christians.
It validates their faith. That they're true followers.
There's that persecution complex. And there's also, you know, this martyr idea about dying for your faith. And also, don't forget, you've got to throw Satan in the works as well, because everything that's coming in that they don't agree with will be influenced by the devil, of course.
There's a movie I watched, and I believe it's on Netflix, 1 year ago, and it was a movie about Hasidic Jews in New York, but Hasidic Jews in general. And there's this, they have conventions, like 45 minutes in, me and my other ex-Jehovah's Witness friend who were watching it, we looked at each other and thought and said, this could be our whole story, and it's another religion entirely. But they have a very strong persecution complex for a really good reason, because of World War II and concentration camps, but they're still using that to this day, that they're the true followers of the only God, and they're about to be attacked again. But the parallels were unbelievable. The speeches from the stage, the fiery talk about the end, and I don't remember the title, I'm terrible at this, but I'll link it later or send you a link. But Hasidic Jews and a documentary about them. The relationship was unbelievable.
And one of the things I read before I left the Witnesses, but in that period of time when must have been cracking open gradually, was the 10 main cults in the world. And listed in there were obviously Scientology, the Moonies, the Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses. And I can't remember who the other 10, you know, of the 10, but that started my thinking, obviously, because I never would have considered them as a cult
right
at the time. And then we were studying the Bible with a couple, and the girl gave us a videotape, shows you how long ago that was, of a deprogramming. Somebody had hired a cult buster to get their daughter back from a cult, and he literally had, in the old days, they used to kidnap them, right? They're not allowed to do that.
Right.
So, I don't know, it was some charismatic leader. It's probably religious, but I didn't really know what the cult was. The point was the methods that were being used. And he got her in a rundown house, and he tied her to a chair. And the parents weren't allowed to be in there. And he would spend time over a couple of weeks just talking to her, and then cranking up this thing where he would make her angry. Well, the aim was to make her angry. And eventually he got like a picture of the cult leader, and he'd burn it in front of her and then start saying horrible things about this cult leader. And eventually she just snapped and just started like screaming at him and, don't talk about him like that. And then all of a sudden she started sobbing and crying and everything. And he just knew that he got through to her at last. So what he had to do was activate her emotion, because she'd been dumbed down by the brainwashing and cognitive dissonance. So she wasn't able to. She was passive. She wasn't able to feel anger, and that's how he brought her out of this stupor, this daydream, if you like. And then the parents were allowed to come in, and she didn't reject them anymore, and she understood, that they just loved her and that they were only doing this for her good, and it all turned out okay. And I still, didn't relate it to me personally as a Jehovah's Witness at the time, but obviously that was a massive influence in my subconscious.
Right. You watched this as a witness. Yeah. You watched this as a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh, yeah, because we was just studying the Bible with them, and it was just, this is interesting, from an intellectual point of view at the time. Wow. So, yeah, lots of things like that happened to me, and I've written about all of them because I've actually remembered all those things that happened during those 20 years and seen them now as stepping stones towards the goal, and that I didn't know was happening at the time. But
that just reminded me of one similar thing I have, where I kind of left the religion at 19, pretty young, and then I sort of got roped back into it because my dad convinced me that I should give it a try. So I started auxiliary pioneering. I didn't believe it, but I'm going to go tell everyone else they should believe it. It's a ridiculous thing. I think a lot of people do that when they're sort of questioning and have a lot of doubts. They'll go even farther and deeper into it somehow. But in that 1.5 years or so, there's this program that started that was very there wasn't promoted program, but it was called Pioneer Assist Others. So there was this elder and pioneer couple that just moved into our congregation, and they asked if I wanted to do it, and I accepted the offer. So basically we met once a week. We talked about how to get better at convincing people that this is true information against all odds, right? So I chose the difficult group of people, agnostics and atheists, because I figured no one's really going for them. They're trying to get Catholics and Lutherans or whoever else is nearby who are already they're already believers in the supernatural and sort of already read the Bible, and you can convince them using their own ideology that their whole background is wrong if this one's more true. That's like the easy pathway. Get a Christian. So I was like, I'm going to try the hard one that no one does, atheist agnostic. So I had all the books of science that Witnesses published, and I gave myself permission to read anything that any author that Jehovah's Witness published about, like Michael Behe. He's a Catholic, and he writes about science. That one's a whole another thing. And then there was guys like I can't remember his name. But there's an author that he's an astrophysicist. And so I was like, I'm going to read anything by that astrophysicist. And they quoted him, so it's fair game at this point. So I started reading all these books, and I started using those little blurbs and little quotes from their own literature to try to tell atheists, give this a chance, give this idea of an afterlife a chance. And I started talking more from a scientific perspective. And this one person stopped me at the door because I did it all. I got them to stay at the door. They didn't slam the door. I used what they call conversation stoppers. Like, you got to block those conversation stoppers with the reasoning from the scriptures. This whole thing, I was deep, deep down this path. And this person stopped me in the door, and they're like, I don't believe anything that this religion teaches. And I think you probably aren't the right, you probably don't belong in this religion. Like, I can tell that you're an intelligent person. I think you should question the very things that you're trying to tell me are true. And they just said, that's not an exact quote, but something to that effect. And I just remember that very distinct door where they got really real, in that moment. And I was like, wow, well, maybe I should take a step back, because I don't really necessarily know any of this is true. It's all very gray, very, who knows if prophecy is real or if they wrote that after the fact. I don't know. That was one of those kind of reflection moments for me.
Yes, right. I know. Just one sentence sometimes from somebody can just really influence you. in a good way. And I think with the science, so-called science that they quote in the literature, they often take it out of context.
Very blatantly.
So if you read the rest of that book by that physicist or that scientist, you would understand that they actually weren't saying what they were trying to make them out to be saying.
Exactly. Yeah. A half sentence is not a legitimate quote, especially if it's the opposite of what they're trying to say.
Yeah, and that's another thing, you're not encouraged to read those things because you're encouraged to subcontract out your critical thinking to the Bethelites and the people who do all the research for you so that you can just get on with the preaching work and not bother your pretty head with all the facts and figures, behind everything.
Exactly. I haven't heard that expression in a while. There was one elder where he quoted a scientist, and I walked up to him after the talk, his public Sunday talk, 45-minute, and I said, "So that author that you quoted, do you ever read what he wrote?" Like, no, I just pulled that from the head paragraph in a Watchtower or in Awake. And I was thinking at that time, the people who are preaching and teaching to me and my friends in the group don't even know what they're saying. That's the most common thing in the world in the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're just quoting the Watchtower who quoted someone else out of context, and no one knows, and they're not going to go read that book.
I'm actually annoyed that I didn't write down an anomaly that I found between the 4 books that talk about the signs of the times, Luke and 3 other Gospels.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Similar accounts, but they're not all exactly the same, right? And I actually found a question that nobody could answer about a conflict to do with that. And they had to refer it to the travelling overseer.
Oh, wow. You took it all the way to the top.
And I remember thinking at the time, because I wasn't naturally an analytical, critical thinker. That wasn't my style. And I've been raised as a witness from the age of 10. But my husband at the time, he is a critical thinker and he's an intelligent, guy. He's a computer analyst and programmer, right? So we used to have all these debates at home when we were preparing for the meetings. And I guess he helped me a lot. Although I was playing the side of the religion at the time, he was questioning things. And that would have helped me to start thinking in a more critical fashion as well.
Yeah.
I'm grateful to him for that. But he's actually thanked me for getting him out because he left 6 months after I did.
Okay.
And
you spearheaded the project.
Yeah. So,
cool.
So we kept a good relationship, over the years. And I guess it's solidarity as well.
Yeah.
You need it when you haven't got your parents and your whole family.
Right. Got to have the chosen family.
Yeah.
That actually brings up a good point for me. I mentioned that there was this couple that came to town last week to visit, another ex-Jehovah's Witness that's sort of in the middle, and we all hung out. We used to hang out in Minneapolis, and we used to have book study together. So it'd be those 2 guys, and sometimes the now wife. I don't want to mention their names, but we would come back to my place, which was near the weekly book study. So that's we were studying Revelation at the time, and the 3rd time studying Revelation in my life. And there's always changes. And anyway, we would go back to my house and then discuss how we felt about the book study and the topic. And we'd start getting off into the weeds about our own theories about what they really meant in a certain scripture versus what the Watchtower teaches. And we kind of had our own ideas that were expanding, and we would counter each other and try to break each other's new ideas. And sometimes we realize it's a much stronger idea than what they're teaching in this book. And we're drinking wine and drinking beers, and we had this whole thing. We started a blog called The Brain Trust, So we would post on there and talk online. This is like 2005, and 2004 or 5. So there's this cool little like crew that we have that we were willing to say all the things you're not allowed to say, willing to break the rules and come up with our own ideas and kind of do independent thinking actively as a group. That was really cool to have that, and I didn't actually think about that, but they were just here. The whole brain trust was here. A decade later.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you've had some fun times. I saw that clip that you did on your Patreon page as well with the crackling fire.
Oh yeah.
You know, telling stories around the fire. Really atmospheric. Loved it. Great filming.
Thank you.
And,
that was fun.
Yeah, and just really good to see people debating and telling their stories and.
Yeah, I'd like to do that more here. That's my old friends. I flew back out to my home area the last year to work with some of those people and film with them. And that's actually something I'll tease real quick. We have a feature-length documentary that we got crowdfunding for a year ago. And that fire scene, that guy is one of the characters in the feature, which is great. He's really funny, animated person. He's really intelligent. But that's coming along. We actually we finished the story cut and we're hoping to have the full feature done. It's coming. I'm not going to put a date on it, but I'd like it to be done by the end of the year. Just have to keep moving forward.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, as a Patreon member of first tier, I did actually see the preview, so that was good.
Yeah. Which preview do you mean?
Preview, yeah, you did like the teaser, I guess you call it. Right?
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, I've got a lot more. We're making lots of teasers now, like 1-minute teasers, just to see if we get people's attention or not. I'm not sure if we're trying a lot of different hooks to see if people like it or not. But there's a lot of cool stuff coming.
Well,
thanks for being a Patreon member, by the way. It's amazing. I really appreciate that.
I'm enjoying it, and I'm promoting it on my page and everything.
Cool.
So.
Thank you. That's awesome. It's a passion project, so it's really nice to have a fan.
I'm one of your groupies. Yay!
Yeah. Likewise.
Well, thanks, God.
Thank you, Denise. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
Everyone should go out and buy Denise's book. To wrap this up. It is called Rising from the Ashes of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's going to be amazing. I'm excited to read it. I haven't read it, I have to admit, but I will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy it.
That's it. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Take care.